Brad, it's getting set to go live. Let me know when we're good, please.
From my end, we're good, Barb.
Brad in here. Where's Brad? Okay, it looks good, Ananda. Let's see. I don't know who I all have here. One sec. Okay. Okay.
We're
Oh, Ananda.
on?
Yes.
Okay. Savian or Gloria? We can't hear either of you.
I'm here.
Go ahead, Savian.
Okay, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. Savian, go ahead and get us started.
Okay, so I just want to start off by speaking directly to Black students and kids in Madison. That I want you to know that as you grow into a world and discover that our humanity is a threat to some, that you're young, you're gifted, and you're Black, and may you know that tragedy will never erase your humanity, and may you know that violence will never destroy your spirit. May you know that your soul is bulletproof. May you wield the strength, power, and wisdom of our ancestors to transform this world in the image of justice, and your right to life and learn is undeniable. We will be remembered for how we conduct ourselves at this time. Our children and students will remember how we acted during this time. They will see humanity for what it truly is during this time. A man's life being taken is not political leverage. Another person's death is not a vehicle to make a point. We must recognize this loss of life. George Floyd died and his family was robbed of a person they love and needed senselessly. No one should die begging to breathe. Today, we grieve collectively and with respect for the family of George Floyd. I ask that we take a moment of silence and that we let this silence speak volumes, and that we let our silence be a call to action, that we dare to create a better world once this moment of silence is past. Okay.
Thank you, Savian, for your words. Beautiful. On behalf of the Board of Education, we want to express our heartbreak over the several recent disturbing events and the harm they are causing our Black community. As a former law enforcement officer, I was disturbed by the horrific murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. There is nowhere in law enforcement training that this use of force tactic is taught or justified. I was in tears watching the death of George Floyd on video footage. I have been in contact with current and former MPD law enforcement officers who have expressed deep sadness, and they recognize how this act of murder by a police officer and other murders of Black men in this country continue to set us back in building trust and legitimacy within the police profession. We have to recognize that we can have all the training and the review of policies and procedures, but if we are not tackling this issue by recognizing how racism factors into the culture of policing and the systemic historical oppression of Black people in this country, we will not see progress. We need to hold police departments and racist police officers accountable for their actions and fight for the injustices of police brutality in our country, while also supporting our law enforcement community. I am proud and in support of Freedom Inc. and Urban Triage for leading us through days of marching and civil protest. This is what democracy looks like. However, we have to do more than protest. We need to continue to focus our efforts on being an anti-racist city, school district, and community by working to dismantle institutional racism. It is important that we recognize the many layers of trauma and the harm our students, families, staff, and Black leaders are experiencing during these tragic events. The Mmsd family remains committed to rejecting and destroying racism of all forms and to continue our work to dismantle those systems in our society that allow for continued violence against Black people. George Floyd, Allman Arbery, Christian Cooper, Brianna Taylor, most recently among them. We must and we will do better. And let's not forget, all of this harm is in addition to the disproportionate amount of stress and suffering our communities of color have endured during the COVID-19 pandemic. To our Black community, we want you to know that the Mmsd family stands strongly with you, that we will hold true to our core values, and we will continue to work in partnership with you to support those who are most impacted. Thank you, and I will turn it over to Ali.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Board President Reyes, and thank you very much, Savian Castro. I want to say briefly, Westmore wrote, in 5 days, a fiery reckoning of an American city, our fates are profoundly intertwined. We have to take care of one another. After the murder of an unarmed Black man, George Floyd, in Minnesota, we stand in solidarity and speak out against police brutality unapologetically. This is not about our nation's history of racial discrimination. This is about the truth and reconciliation it will take to address our current state. To love myself and other Black people is an act of resistance I embrace every day. To proclaim that our Black lives matter, that we Black people have the right to exist and breathe and return home to our families after work or a run or picking up a snack at a store. The truth is, I am more heartbroken than anything else right now, and there is not a breath in my body I can take for granted. I ask that we make space to mourn, that this moment be radically tender, that we teach our children that we are capable of justice. Martin Luther King said, justice is what love looks like in public, which is why I would like to say without hesitation, I want my community to know that I love us out loud and in public. We will take action and move forward with the voices of those most impacted, amplified, and centered. I want to thank my Board of Education colleagues for affording the members of this body who self-identify as Black the space to acknowledge how tragedy, terror, and discrimination have impacted the conditions of the African American community and people across the United States and locally. We as a community have a lot to learn about loving Black people and respecting the freedom of Black people. We have a lot to learn when it comes to teaching our children to recognize the humanity of all people. This learning starts with listening to we, the people who are darker than you. Right now is always the time for justice. We understand that change cannot wait, and we will be part of this change with you. To our children, it could be easy to look back and see injustice, but to look back and see only injustice would be to erase the people who have overcome injustice. You, young people, are a part of a long legacy of people who have stood up for each other. You have inherited this storm, and we promise We will teach you to dance in the rain together. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ali. We'll go ahead and turn it over to Ananda to start our instruction work group.
Thank you, President Reyes. My sincere gratitude to both Savian Castro's reflection and the moment of pause. Thank you to my colleague Ali Mudro for such inspirational words, both to us and also to our community. Yes, thank you both. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that today we are have one of our colleagues leaving us. Our student representative Anika this is her final board meeting. However, she'll continue to be serving as a president of Student Senate for 2021 school year. So congratulations, Anika. I know that race was extraordinary and challenging in more ways than we can actually speak to. So, extra congratulations to you for a well-deserving position. As a president, she will also serve as the alternative student rep to the board. And Anika is currently a senior at Memorial High School. And I wanted to take this moment to actually open space to my colleagues, and I'm gonna call you all in order that you're showing up in the screen here to say briefly a few words of appreciation to you, Anika. So Nicky, you're first here on my screen.
Annika, you've done a wonderful job at being student representative. Your questions have always been insightful. You've always had very good intuition, and I'm really impressed by your work ethic and your ability to dive in to very complex tasks. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you stay in touch with us.
Chris Caruzzi and Gloria Reyes.
Hi, Nika. It's been great to work with you this year, and I'm really glad you're going to be president next year. I think it gives us some continuity in terms of understanding the issues and bringing issues we've heard about on the board this year to the fuller body of the Student Senate next year. I truly appreciate your fantastic public speaking skills as a debater and a forensicator, and I wish you the best as you become a senior. And I hope you kicked butt on your AP tests.
Thank you, Anika. You've done such a great job. I've so enjoyed having you on the board. I'm telling you, girl, you are going places. It's amazing. I'm so looking forward to seeing your progress, your future. And, I hope you stick around to run for the school board someday. I would love that. That would be amazing. But congratulations. I'm glad you're still going to be you can be the president, and we'll stay connected. And yeah, take care of yourself. You're at Memorial, right? Yeah, my daughter will be going to Memorial next year, so I'll have to connect you too.
And Ali and Savian.
It was such an incredible honor to get to know you and work with you and protest with you and organize with you. Thank you for speaking to menstrual equality. Thank you for putting pressure on our district to always do the right thing for our students. You are a tremendous activist and leader, and I envy anybody who gets to vote for you. Like Gloria, I hope that we all get to vote for you one day. I think you'll be a tremendous president of Student Senate. I think you'd be the tremendous president of anything you want to be president of. You got my vote.
Hey, Nick, I just want to say how much I appreciate your leadership on the board and forcing us to be better with consent culture in the district and always pushing us to be anti-racist for our students. And I can't wait to see what your future holds and where you decide to take your leadership, because it's needed wherever you choose to take it. So thank you so much.
Christina Gomez-Smith.
Hi, Nika. We haven't had a lot of time to work on the board together, but I just wanted to tell you and thank you for your leadership, the time and talents that you have offered to the board this year. And thank you for continuing to be involved, and look forward to hearing from you as president of the Student Senate. So thank you for continuing to be in a leadership role in this district.
Thank you, colleagues. I wanted to take a moment to open to Jane Belmore and to Barb Osman.
Thank you, Ananda. Anika, thank you so much for your participation this year. Your comments have always been inspiring and insightful, and it's so important for us to have the student voice that you bring to our work on the board. So thank you for being willing to stick with us these long nights and give us your comments that were really, really helpful. We wish you the best. We hope you stay in touch, and good luck being a senior.
Barb?
Wow, thank you, Ananda. Anika, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you, Ananda, also. I am always amazed by how the busy high school kids who achieve so highly can take the time to do what they do on this board, because I know it takes a lot of effort. And I am so grateful for how easy it is to work with you guys, and the voice that you give to the board is so appreciated. Thank you so very much for what you've done for this school year, and you have a great senior year. Thank you.
So Anika, was an honor. I think the beautiful thing about being virtually that you have now this keepsake to take with you, this piece of YouTube video to take it with you, and the acknowledgement of all your work, your advocacy, your voice, and how much you grew and you allowed for us to grow with you. So my sincere gratitude, and I want to open up if you wanted to say a few things.
Thank you all for everything you just said. I learned so much from this incredible opportunity and all of your amazing leadership. It was really so cool to see how the district works and all the thought that you guys put into the decisions that help us students every day. And it's truly been an incredible experience. I've learned so much, and I'm excited to see the future of the district.
Thank you so much, Anika. So next, we would like to congratulate Julia Allman. Am I saying this right, Julia?
Yeah, Julia.
I'm sorry?
Julia Allman, is it?
Allman.
Yeah.
Julia Allman, a senior at West High School, who will serve with us as the next student representative. So welcome, Julia. It's really great to have you with us. And we wanted to thank you both for willing to take the time and the sacrifices that you make in order to be a representative in our board. Thank you and welcome, Julia.
Thank you.
So next, I'd like to move for us to approve the minutes from the instruction work group public input in session dated April 6, 2020. Can I get a second?
Second by Nicky Vandermeer.
Anika, your advisory vote? Oh, I'm sorry. Should we do which one? Should we do both?
Just Anika.
Just Anika? Okay.
Mhm.
Anika said aye. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
7-0, motion carry. Meeting minutes have been approved. Okay. Barb, it's only 1 minute meetings, right?
Sorry, those were taken separately, so they are separate. So
Okay.
Now it's the instruction work group.
Okay, so entertaining a motion to approve minute meetings from the instruction work group meeting dated April 6, 2020. Anika, your advisory vote?
I'll move.
Oh, I'm sorry, a second.
Second,
Nikki, second. Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next, we are going to discuss some changes on our attendance policy. And I am trying to see who is in the screen, who is going to be leading us. Jane, are you kicking us off? Oh, or Lisa?
I can do that, and Lisa can come on if we have questions. Basically, this is just to align with DPI rules around summer school, and they have given us the flexibility on minutes, and so we are just asking that we will continue to record attendance the same way we have been in summer school. And I think that's pretty much it. It's for this summer school session only for this year. Lisa, is there anything else we need to know about that?
No, Jane, I think you covered it. We wanted to bring it to the instructional work group today because it needs to be approved prior to the start of summer school. So no, I think you've covered it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Lisa, are you opening for questions at this point?
Sure. If there are any questions, I have Nicole here, our Director of Summer School, and also Sherry to answer any detailed questions around the policy adjustment.
I see you, Chris Caruzzi.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what is the rationale for only taking attendance weekly during summer school?
Well,
Jay,
so
do you want to take that?
Well, part of it is, I can just take a little bit of it. Part of it is the, in virtual learning, there are so many different activities taking place. Some of them, kids are in groups together. Some of them, they're working on their own. So I think that has been the part of the reason that we've gone to this attendance. But I think Jay is here too, and he really worked on making sure that we were able to have this attendance policy consistent. Jay, are you here? Yeah.
I am. Yeah, thank you, Jane. And I think you framed it up pretty well, but just the instructional shifts that our teachers make when we head into virtual learning, the week sets up differently. For compulsory attendance during the regular school year, obviously we're taking attendance in every class period every day because we expect to see every student in every classroom every day. Virtual learning is slightly different, and the typical routine is that teachers would share activities and assignments, tasks with students on Monday, and then provide some work time with optional office hours, for example, Tuesday and Thursday, where they might also see a student who's like working through those assignments. Wednesday maybe is an optional class Zoom where they might expect to see all students but no requirement. And then on Friday, we would ask them to take attendance where they would mark a student absent only if they did not have any contact with that student throughout the week. We felt like that allowed for the flexibility of our teachers to use the schedule throughout the week without an expectation that they're seeing their students every single day. And recognizing that's pretty routine for virtual learning, for there to be flexibility offered for students to engage when it works for them and when they need to connect with their teacher. Likewise, this also allowed us to really focus on kind of refining and narrowing down for students that we just weren't able to be in touch with. Our primary goal for attendance throughout virtual learning was making sure that we knew if any of our students or families needed something, and we did that through engagement each week. So the attendance system that we set up, it served that primary purpose, and it also allowed us to sort of monitor students' engagement in virtual learning. And we think that the same approach is going to serve us well during summer school.
Chris, you were muted.
I just want to share that I do have concerns with weekly attendance becoming the norm with online instruction. I understood as we were easing into online instruction and trying to figure out what the barriers were to kids being able to engage online, that we needed to give kids flexibility to just participate when they could. But given that we may be looking at virtual instruction moving into the fall and beyond, I'm thinking we might want to increase expectations for attendance to daily. And summer school might be the opportunity to kind of shift our norms towards expectations for daily attendance. If we don't have kids checking in with us every day, we actually don't know if they need support. You know, not seeing that kids aren't able to check in with attendance daily could be a red flag to us that we need to contact their families and find out what's going on and figure out if they need greater support from Mmsd to be able to engage in virtual learning and get the support they need. So I'm just, you know, I'm not vehemently opposed to this, but I also am wondering if it's the right way to go in terms of giving kids all the support we possibly can to help them learn.
So Chris, I think one of the things we hope to do is learn from summer school and learn from our virtual experience around that. This may be one of the areas we would want to look further into to see, I mean, and if we go to more virtual learning in the fall, which I'm sure we will have some component, I think that's one of the areas we'll want to look at. And the way we have summer school set up this year, we'll have some opportunities to kind of see how it would be to try some things out that might be a little more consistent.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, Christina?
Yeah, I guess in addition to the attendance policy and understanding how much, you know, looking at that later as a metric of how many students attended, are we going to have other metrics for figuring out how engaged kids were in the learning? It's just such a different thing to do everything virtually, and especially as a summer school for the first time. What are the other metrics of us being able to tell that kids are staying engaged?
I can start with that. At the secondary level, the metrics that we use for engagement are course completion and credit completion. And at the elementary level, there are some formative assessments pre and post that we use with students that are curriculum based.
Thanks, Lisa. Christina, did you have anything else?
I guess, that works the same way for summer school then too? We're talking both regular year and summer school, Lisa?
Right, so we're trying out our fast progress monitor this summer for kids, and then correct. So it would be credit attainment, and you'll get a full report on credit attainment and grade improvement. We always keep track of all those metrics and bring those back to the board on a yearly basis.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Nicky?
Yes, I know this is difficult, but how do we measure with our kids with IEPs that goals are being met when some goals can't be done without suspending the IEP?
I'm going to see if John is here to take that. I know that they've been doing some extensive work on how to actually deliver instruction with students with special needs, but also how to monitor their progress. And that's going to be something that we'll be continuing to learn about. We've just gotten more guidance on that, Nicky, just this week, actually. So John, do you have anything, or Lisa, to say around that?
I don't believe that John is here, but we would certainly monitor goals if it's an ESY situation, Nicky. And then I know that, you know, we all know that IEPs are not implemented in the summer. However, we have transition meetings and provide special education support, and would want to be sure that we are differentiating and modifying as needed based on sort of the grade level standards that kids are working at through their IEP.
And just one more question, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Lisa. And my question, Lisa, is when we temporarily modify, that's just for the summer, then it goes back without having you'd have to have a separate IEP meeting to permanently change anything, correct?
Yeah, there isn't any, I mean, we don't rewrite IEPs for the summer, but we certainly have transition meetings and do what we can to differentiate and support a student in the summer so that they can access grade level standards.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Any other, Chris Caruzzi?
I think this question is for Sherry, but without this change to this policy, what would be the financial and other implications for the district?
Well, actually, this change was precipitated by DPI. They didn't necessarily provide or come up with guidelines for the amount of instruction for the summer. They simply said that it would be based on our attendance policy. And as long as we had a policy in place that was working for us, and as long as the board voted on that policy, then we could use that policy when we provide our reports to DPI after summer instruction.
Okay. Chris, you good?
Just to follow that up, if we were to stay at daily attendance and our attendance was low, would that impact our ability to get reimbursed for summer school?
Summer school, you have to, it's based on daily attendance. So what DPI has said is that as long as we are following our current policy, which is the policy that we're presenting today, then we are within the guidelines to receive funding for summer school. But it is also understood by our families that once the students sign up from the first day, they are required to attend the program.
Thank you for all those questions, everyone. So we want to move to the next item on our agenda is around virtual learning update. So,
I'm sorry.
oh, sorry.
I think we need to vote on whether or not we want to change the policy for summer school. And honestly, I am in favor of changing the policy to accommodate virtual learning and this current moment to be consistent with what we're already doing. I think our staff are, trying to mitigate some pretty extreme challenges, and this is one of the ways that they're doing it. And I think DPI is also trying to mitigate some pretty extreme challenges, and this is one of the ways that we're doing it. And obviously, it's not ideal because it's the response to a pandemic.
Thank you, Ali.
I think the vote happens in June.
June 29th, yeah.
June 29th.
I think we actually have to have it before then, and we talked about scheduling. Did we talk about scheduling it next week, or was it tonight that we were going to take it?
It's not on the thing tonight.
It's not on the notice in here, Jane,
Right.
is to
It is
on a meeting.
scheduled for the regular meeting for June 29th.
Mike wants to hop in here.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, everybody. We will schedule that on June 9th. It'll be just a short public appearance on that night. We had to change it because we need to have that change before summer school starts, and the 29th would be too late. So thank you for your flexibility and letting us add that today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we just had that conversation this morning, so.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Jane, for bringing this up. And I know the team is trying to play catch up in a lot of the planning last minutes, and of course, making sure that our policies are in alignment to what we're trying to do here. Next is a virtual learning update. So aligned to what we were just discussing in regards to attendance, we, our team have been doing some pretty extensive planning around what virtual learning could look like for the fall. I think we're trying to preview to folks, on the board, but also to our community, that there are, we are also trying to follow a lot of regulations and guidance from public health professionals. And also we are in a situation where learning about COVID, learning about the impact of the pandemic is always evolving. So we have asked Lisa, and I've been working with Lisa closely over the last, I think, month around putting together you know, an information that's helpful to us as board members, but also reiterate to our community how and what are we thinking in regards to virtual learning. But most important is to let our community know that we are ahead of really trying to understand and making sure that there is a plan and making sure that our students are going to be served. In particular, you know, I appreciate my colleague Nicky Vandermeulen bringing that up, the students with IEPs, because so much has changed and there's so many other complex challenges to that, you know, likewise with English learners, you know, there's different complexities for different students, and our staff is constantly trying to figuring out what is the universal strategy for a lot of our students and what is the targeted strategies for our students. So I asked Lisa to come tonight to talk about, to give an update on where folks are at and talk a little bit about the scenarios. As my colleagues here have questions, please write them down. Lisa's gonna go through the presentation, and then towards the end, I'm just gonna call on folks based on the order on the screen, and then we'll try to get some conversation going and clarify any additional questions. So Lisa, Jean, do you have any words that you wanted to start
Yes,
about?
thanks, Ananda. And I think you've really done a nice job of sort of laying out the complexities here that we're working with. But just wanted to let you know that, you know, we went through closing school. We had to work on graduation and summer school and grading and all the kind of things that we have been working through. So we've been doing that as work teams. So we've gotten a pretty good rhythm going with that. And we just started 2 weeks ago now. I think we really brought this to the work team. We've added some folks to our senior leadership team who will be necessary to help us work through the different scenarios, but we are devoting significant time to this. I would say, you know, probably 3 days a week that we are meeting, and then we're going to be meeting in work teams. We hope to have a timeline, at least a rough draft to the board and our next meeting. So that will be helpful. And as you said, Ananda, I think it's going to be most helpful that we get the information as we see it and as it develops to our community and our parents.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Thank you. I think that's a good thing to note, because I did, you know, I think some of us may have heard people saying like, why is it taking so long? I'm like, we moved pretty drastically, about 27,000 students into virtual learning, and trying to understand the complexities of what it is to move into virtual learning. And so Lisa's going to talk a little bit about what their findings and whatnot from surveys and whatnot. And at the same time, just giving a lot of grace to a body of work that was not there. There was no budget line item. There was no, you know, project definition or charge when we started our year. So that is a really significant change to anyone. And so I want to give you all some opportunity to share that with us, like how has been your journey and learnings and how we can support the work moving forward. So thank you.
So Lisa?
Thanks, Ananda. I appreciate that lead in, and Jane, thank you as well. And I also just want to appreciate Ananda as my partner in this work, the instructional group chair. Appreciate your feedback and the communication cycle that we have working with each other. I really feel a sense of shared leadership for the work. So just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
So first of all, I just want folks to know before we start, and Andrew will be coming on to talk a little bit about the ways in which we're gathering feedback and the ways in which we're using surveys and focus groups. But I did want to start by saying that first and foremost, we are keeping equity at the center of this work and the planning. We know that our current systems actually have created the inequities that exist, and we actually have an opportunity here to do things differently and to think more equitably about the opportunities that are in front of us and be innovative about that. I want to say that we are reading and learning from all kinds of sources. And this slide, yep, that's fine, Barb. There is a sample of some of the early information that we have been learning from. I want you to know that as we looked at that, we did not have guidance from DPI or some of our other organizations, and we will be using that DPI guidance first and foremost moving forward, as well as guidelines from the CDC and public health. I also want to emphasize that there is a lot of work to do around the operational side of the house moving forward. We are looking at a variety of options in our plan that all have the safety and well-being of our students at the center. And all of these options will include some degree of virtual learning. We want to be sure that we're supporting economic recovery, prioritizing the age and learning needs of our students. We want to pay attention to instructional needs, staffing capacity, reallocation of time, space, resources, and budget, and also tightly focusing on the social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students moving forward. Okay, next slide, Barb, thank you. So one of the first things that we did together as a team is we created a project charter, right? We needed a plan to plan. We have never done this before. So it's important that we clarify roles and responsibilities and that we ground our work in our commitment to equity and the goals in the strategic framework. The project charter, once it's finalized, will include a description of our work, a communication plan with the voices of stakeholders threaded through that, the goals and metrics of the plan, where there are opportunities and where there are risks we want to pay attention to, where we need and are seeking stakeholder feedback and voice, a timeline, as Jane referred to, and the resources that are needed. Tonight, we're going to take a little look at the project structure of a way that we are thinking about managing the complex work that's in front of us. And that is on the next slide. Okay, so this is our best attempt at the time to sort of lay out the pieces of this work that are important moving forward. And I want to thank Caroline Racine-Gillis and our senior leadership team for helping us to think this through, and for Nicole Nichols as well to helping us think through that voice and choice and family engagement and partnerships piece as critical to lifting the voices of our stakeholders. So I'm just going to talk through it, not reading every box, but give you a sense of the overall project structure that we have drafted to guide our work. So at the top, you can see that pink box details the superintendent and the Board of Education, right, as the final decision makers and resource allocation providers for the district. That accountable group of people, right, the senior leadership team is feeding information around the feedback we're getting from the advisory groups off to the left, the different stakeholders, public health, MTI leadership. I have been meeting with MTI on a weekly basis. I actually shared with them this work that we're doing, the Big 5 school districts, our Black educators networks, our advisory groups, TRAC, all for the purposes of providing us feedback to inform the overall project and the work streams. That then feeds down to that barrel off to the side there. All of that is input, right? It's the voices, it's the data, it's the resource documents, it's what we learn from the people in our community. And all of that input will go into our plan. And that plan that you see to the right with all of the boxes includes some of the big buckets that we know that we need to work on and pay attention to moving forward. There is that blue circle that you see towards the top underneath senior leadership team. Just want to call out that as we put together our plan, we need people to manage each part of the plan. And we need those people to know what their purpose is, to know what their roles and responsibilities are, and to know what the outcomes, the intended outcomes are. Before I go into the operational and the instructional sides of the plan, I'd like to call everyone's attention to that circle up in the corner, the 7 circles there, and know that we are paying attention to those circles at the top, the structures, the patterns, the processes, the technical pieces of the work. But we also need to pay attention to and take care of the relationships, the identities, and the information that we're gathering from people to account for our overall plan. So we need to pay attention to what's on the top of the green line and what's on the bottom of that green line. So moving down to the bottom half of the page, there is an arrow there that highlights our commitment to equity and our dedicated process to lifting up student, family, staff, and community voice. It doesn't just exist in one area. It doesn't just exist at the beginning or at the end. We really feel that that's important to highlight that throughout the work. We put buckets around some of this, around the operational side of the house and around the instructional side of the house, or we're calling it the acceleration side of the house. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of minutes. We've identified a few areas on the operational side that are critical to the work. Health services. Sally, our district nurse, is working very closely with her colleagues in the medical field. We're working very closely on the operational side with Chad around facilities and the facilities plan. Food services, how are we going to get kids places? Transportation, building maintenance, what will we need to be safe, to maintain recommended social distancing? Our calendar and instructional minutes, right? We've got to get that right. Our enrollment office, our schedules moving forward. We are not going back, most likely, to the traditional model of face-to-face schools. So everything that we have thought of as traditional before, we have to rethink now. Enrollment needs to be different, scheduling needs to be different. As Chris called out, our attendance will need to look different in a different time. So we want to be really thoughtful about the opportunities that exist. We also know on the operational side, we need to pay attention to the work our Human Resources Department does. And after this, we'll be talking a little bit about Handbook and some language changes that might help us to get after some of those gaps that exist and some of the opportunities that we will have moving forward. On the instructional side, you can see in parens, it says acceleration. If there's one thing that I believe in and our team believes in, is that we are not moving into a world of remediation. We are actually moving into beginning the fall, accelerating the learning of our students, knowing what specific skills we need to get after and offering students the appropriate grade level content at the same time. And we'll work hard with our teachers to help develop them and the teacher teams so that we can do that for our students. On that side of the house, you see the curriculum and instruction and assessment side. You see digital learning, so we'll be moving into sort of virtual learning 2.0, so to speak. The social emotional learning, the mental health supports that we know we want to be able to provide for students and staff. We know we're going to have to think very carefully about our students with special education needs, our students with language needs, and our students who might be experiencing homelessness. Also on the instructional side, our chiefs will be working very closely with school leadership, principals, and SBLTs to make sure there is a high degree of communication and support for teachers, students, and families so that those students are set up for success in environments that are safe and also supportive. So all of those pieces that we've drafted here, right, point to an output on the side, that successful launch of a comprehensive plan. And I would also add at the bottom, when we talked about this plan from the beginning, we really saw how, right, the budget and the resources piece, the policy and the procedures, the professional learning, the family engagement and communication, that has to be threaded throughout all of the work that we're doing. I appreciate you being patient with us on this first draft of this. Our communications department will no doubt, after we talk about this, zhuzh this up a little bit and pretty it up, but we wanted you to see what we were thinking at this early stage. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew because we have been intentional about gathering feedback in the form of surveys and reflections to put into an end of year report and to also inform our work moving forward as we learn every day. It seems like every day something else happens and we think about it differently, and we have to be flexible in order to pivot when we need to do the best for students and families. So Andrew, I am going to hand it over to you to take over the next couple slides.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Thanks, board. Appreciate the opportunity to walk you through some of our thinking on how to best inform our plans for beginning the school year. And of course, we want our plans to be grounded in good, strong evidence of what we have learned and what could work and what could work better, but also to really ground in experience of our users, our students, our families, our staff. So if we go to the next slide, that'll show you, it's kind of, I'm trying to make a lot of moving parts as simple as possible. It will culminate in two things. This work that we're doing will culminate into two things. One is our reopening and recovery plans, and the other is an end of year report. Now, I'm calling it an end of year report because we have a tradition of annual reports, but this is not a traditional year, so I'll call it something a little bit different. The reopening and recovery plans need to be informed, as I described, by people's experiences. And we've set out a series of surveys that I'll describe in a moment that really gets at the experiences of our families, our staff, and our students during this time of virtual learning. And that survey itself can inform directly inform those recovery and reopening plans and the end of year report, but it can also influence and inform a virtual learning evaluation. And I'll describe that also. The virtual learning evaluation itself can also inform those plans and inform the board and inform the public of what our collective experience has been and the stories that are coming out of that experience. And of course, we also had just over 2/3 of a conventional school year. So we had some intentions, we had some plans, we may even have some outcomes that we can share, even though the majority of our strategic framework metrics are driven by assessments. So we will be putting together a proposal and bringing evidence then of how things had fared for the first Q1, Q2, and most of Q3. So next slide then will outline our virtual learning evaluation. So very important that we set out to investigate and convey to folks what we had intended to do during virtual learning here these months. Exactly what did we do as related to those intentions and how did it go? Again, really keying in on the experience and the impact of the work that we've done. Now, I did add a note at the bottom here that we're calling virtual learning a pretty broad bucket that would include not just virtual or distance education, but also health and social emotional supports and provision of technology, nutrition, and so on. So that evaluation is going to be quite broad and not strictly limited to the instruction strategies that we provided. The next slide, please. So on the survey, we are hitting some of our biggest user groups, and we fielded that May 25th, and we will keep that survey open until this Sunday, June 7th. The next slide will give us an outline then of the exact user groups, our students going down to grade 5, our families, all families involved, K to 12, teachers, principals, and instructional support staff are all included. The questions that we're asking do fall into 3 broad categories around support and connection, around implementation, and around outcomes. And the questions that we have been informed by a large body of work, including the TNTP, a document that was shared earlier, Wisconsin's DPI, various universities, our own climate survey, and actually our own independent school or local surveys of users. So we've been able to string together all kinds of really great questions from these various instruments, from these various sources to get the question bank we have. The next slide, please. So the timeline, as I described, if you go down a few bullets, looking at closing the survey out on June 7th, we'd be summarizing the results certainly no later than the 22nd for SLT review on the 23rd. That date is likely to move up as we're keying in on exact timelines. So our intent then would be to provide principals with the results no later than July 2nd, and again, possibly earlier. The results then being used to inform those reopening and recovery plans into July, with then some additional work around focus groups and interviews to also inform plans and our evaluation into August, and then the end of year report. We can plan on an August date, but that has yet to be nailed down exactly. The next slide, please. So I want to stress that the survey is one instrument, is one piece that lets us understand broad patterns, but we do need to go in and engage various voices and elevate those voices through interviews and through focus groups. So this is very similar to the work that the board had recently seen on our referendum planning and our long-range facility planning, to go out and engage folks to get their experiences and take the extra effort to elevate those voices. So the scope, of course, cannot be as exhaustive given our timelines as what we had done with the referendum and long-range facility planning, but we will certainly get those voices incorporated. And the next slide, please. And this is one where I believe I'll turn it back over to Lisa and Jane to talk through scenarios and primary goals of reentry recovery plans.
Thanks, Andrew. Wanted to give you a bit of a summary around our return to school and what we're thinking about. Again, we see this as an opportunity. We know that the traditional way of schooling, as I have said before, has created the disparities that exist, and we want to get after this as an opportunity to do things better. So first of all, to acknowledge there are operational complexities that exist. First and foremost, we want to care for and focus on health and safety. And we know that in this, whatever scenario and whatever situation we go back into, we know we need to be flexible and pivot when and if needed. As a district, we've considered 3 different scenarios, and this is probably not news to any of you, but it will give you an idea of where we're headed. So districts across the nation are considering going back to a face-to-face model, sort of traditional model, a fully virtual model, or a hybrid model, which allows the flexibility for some combination of face-to-face and virtual, depending on what we're hearing from the CDC and or other local agencies. As a senior leadership team, we are focusing on that hybrid model. We are actually developing a formal definition of the hybrid model at this point in time, and then thinking about what strategies can come within that. That's our next discussion. I want you to know that as we return to school, it's important to know that we're focusing on operational complexities and operational pieces that we need to get right. We're also focused on social and emotional support and rigorous instruction. We know that we're entering virtual learning 2.0. We know that we can up the level of rigor while we also up the level of social and emotional support, and that we're going to base our work on the essential standards and skills that students need. What's exciting to us is to really think differently about the use of time. I would add their resources and also maximizing staff talents. Kelly Ruppel is relentless in her approach to finding money to help staff to plan this summer, to help us get ready around instructional and virtual learning. So we're really scouring to maximize the time and resources that we have and including our staff and the talents that they bring to support some of those structures and units of instruction for next year. We'll be providing professional learning for staff, which will include, as I've said, that sort of virtual learning 2.0 moving forward. We have learned a lot in the last couple of months when we have gone in fully virtual. I'll use the example of John Harper and his department as they support students with disabilities. They've actually done an amazing job individualizing support and instruction, both virtually and through packets and other supportive materials for students. And we're learning a lot about how special ed assistants and cross-categorical teachers can really work with students to actually get after individual needs. So John and his department are also planning for some specific professional learning to support our students with disabilities. And Sylvia and her department are also learning more about language attentive strategies for our English language learners. Our professional learning for the summer of K-5 at the elementary level will focus on foundational skills and the importance of explicit structured phonics. Someone had asked at the last board meeting, you know, what's happening with the elementary materials adoption. And remember that we had been talking about the professional learning that goes with any new high quality set of materials will continue. And this is our proof of that. That will be our focus this summer. Our secondary focus will be on standards-based grading and feedback to students. How often we talk to students in a virtual environment and a face-to-face environment. What does that feedback look like? And how are we gaining feedback from students about what they are learning? We'll be focusing on diagnostic and formative assessments moving forward. We're going to have to know what skills students have or need to gain as they move forward in instruction. And we'll also be focusing on social and emotional supports. Jay and his team have learned an incredible amount. They have put out a lot of really helpful resources for students and families, and we'll build on that strong foundation moving forward as we start back in the fall. Okay, last slide, I think, Barb. So interested in hearing a little bit from you about what excites you about what you've heard about our process. What else should we be thinking about, knowing that we are going to continue to communicate with you about this along the way? And then what questions do you have? Jane, is there anything you wanted to add at the end?
Travel a long way to get to my end. No, I think this is, as we said, this is like the product of a little bit of research and work so far, but we know we have a lot more to do. So we'll appreciate hearing what you have to say about the plan at this point.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jane. And thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Andrew, and thank you, the team, for giving us a pretty good macro level organizational structure of how the work is being rolled out all the way to specific bodies of work that is, you know, important to make sure it's orchestrated to move this work forward. I know also that the team has done a lot of outreach to all the advisory groups, including the groups that advise for students with IEPs and for EL students. And there has been a lot of questions in regards to the surveys. And I know Andrew had that on the slide. I just wanted to elevate that you know, the way in which Lisa and I have been talking about, we really need to meet like 100% of contact, right? Like if we haven't been able to contact a particular family, we needed to figure out what that is. And so aside from the district level, that has been through the bilingual resources specialist, the special education teachers, through focus groups and whatnot, in order to make sure that we have a really comprehensive outreach to all our families. So with that, I wanted to open up for questions, and I'm going to start calling you out. First, I wanted to call our students. So Anika and Julia, if you have any questions or comments about what you just learned today.
So I had a few questions. So my first question was about student engagement and participation in the curriculum. So how is the district continuing to promote students taking advantage and learning from the materials their teachers are providing them?
Question.
I think that students right now are still learning on the variety of platforms that they have, Anika, and also some of the free sort of open source resources that are there. We have learned a lot about what works, what kids are actually enjoying and what they don't find as engaging. And we are hoping to learn through the surveys that students are taking about how virtual learning has worked for them, and from staff, how virtual learning has worked for them. Like, it's going to be very interesting to see what those voices are saying and if they sync up or if they don't, and what we need to do about that.
Awesome. My second question was about student-teacher relationships. So, what strategies the district is promoting to try to encourage them in a virtual setting?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm going to let Jay come on after I give this a shot. I know that teachers do have office hours and are in connection with students and families. I know that our student services staff are making a point to make sure they're reaching out to families multiple times a week to ensure that their student is engaged. And whatever we do in the fall, we've been thinking about how can we provide a supportive transition for students. You know, some schools we're hearing, as we're reading a lot about what schools are thinking about, some schools have thought about, what if you kept the student with the same teacher the first couple weeks of school? What if, you know, you transition to a different grade level teacher later on? What if you have a teacher get to know it, or a student get to know a group of teachers? So those are some of the things, Anika, that we're thinking about to really support engagement. Jay, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that I think will continue to be focused on well into the fall, and just recognize that when times are as uncertain as they are now, we know that our students and our staff benefit from routines and from relationships, and also from just really clear communication on how things are supposed to work. We're encouraging our teachers to build as much into their virtual lessons as they can that foster additional relationship building. Sometimes that's one-on-one between a teacher and a student with a simple prompt on how are you doing, what's been going on, what are you thinking about, 3 things you're worried about, 3 things that you're proud of. Beyond that, sometimes it's in a classroom Zoom, where just simply the being able to see classmates that people might not have seen for a while. Our teachers are increasingly skilled at using Zoom to put students into smaller groups and replicate some of the things that might typically happen in a classroom, especially early in a school year, to get students to know each other. You know, we're fully aware that this year we had the benefit of existing relationships between students and between students and teachers that we carried into virtual learning. You know, and the learning curve will be a little bit steeper as we head into fall, where we're helping teachers get to know their students and helping students get to know each other in a virtual context. But again, we know that our teachers have built up an incredible skill set during these last 2 months that they'll carry with them into the fall. Additionally, we want to make sure that we're sharing with teachers additional resources to help facilitate some of that relationship building with activities and things that shouldn't be done in a standalone manner, and instead should be actually just built in. You know, and this is stuff that our teachers are really good at and typically focus on early in the school year. And it's just a matter of making sure that we're leveraging this in a virtual context to serve the same purpose.
I had a question. I think there's been a lot of focus on attendance, and I think there's a tendency for students to do exactly what's required and not necessarily more. So I guess I'm wondering how attendance is really requiring participation and incentivizing engagement and real consistent learning, and how we can plan to kind of keep the standards as high as they were before this next year.
Yeah, I think a lot of that will also come down to decisions that are made around grading. And I know that there's a lot of consideration put into whether or not it's actual letter grades or if it's pass fail. Obviously, our hope is that students find the intrinsic reward in learning, but through my own kids, I also see that we're basically, working through things as assigned and not necessarily going above and beyond. Hoping that as virtual learning becomes more routine for students, that it'll become more natural for them to continue engaging in some of the things that are there. Also, as our teachers gather additional experience, it'll be easier for them to differentiate and provide a variety of additional activities that students can jump into, as opposed to sort of a set of assigned tasks that are used for the entire classroom. So a variety of things there, but increasingly our teachers are focused, especially as we head into a school year as opposed to wrapping up a school year, doing everything we can to make sure that our students are staying engaged and involved in what they're learning.
Thank you so much, Julia. So we're gonna go Savian and Nicky.
I will reserve my questions or comments later. I still trying to gather them.
Thank you. Nicky?
Yes, my concerns, thank you for the work. It's done very well. My only concern, my multiple concerns are with the new teacher project, the TNTP, because one, since 2010, there have been issues with under-licensed or uneducated special education teachers teaching special education. And that really worries me, not only on quality, but also on student safety if it's done in person. My other issue is by researching the company, when I see as part of their materials for Georgia that the teacher crisis is not just teacher retention, but because we didn't keep the right teachers. I'm a little concerned of what the right teachers are, and I'm really worried that it will affect teacher morale if we do that. I want our students to learn, I want our teachers to be supported. I'm just not sure that that's the best model of doing things. That's just my personal opinion and aside. I think special ed is going all right for now. I think actually it's done pretty well. But my one request is just don't forget about it. That's because I'm afraid compensatory services could build up. Then people will file it after the pandemic, then we may have a budget crisis, and I don't want that to hurt our school or our teachers.
Thank you, Nikki. I just want to jump in and then I'll let Lisa add some things to this too. The new teacher project was an example, and we have taken a few things from that we like and want to work with, but it is by no means going to be our model. And we have many more resources that we're using, a long list of them, which would be happy for you guys to, take a look at. Okay, so just want to make sure that we're going to be creating what is best for our students, using information and resources that fit for us. Lisa, did you want to?
Oh, thanks, Jane. No, I would agree with you. I think, there's been so much coming across our screens every day, different models, what different states are doing. Nikki, what I appreciate what you said is this importance of teacher talent and making sure that we have the right teachers in front of students. I absolutely agree with that. I think that in many ways, moving into this virtual environment in the fall actually does give us an opportunity to do creative ways of instruction. I'll give you an example. If there's an AP course offered at one of our high schools, we actually could have a certified AP teacher teaching that to more than just the students at that high school. We know that we have difficulty getting bilingually certified teachers at the high school level. We could have a bilingually certified social studies teacher teach multiple sections across the district in a virtual environment. I think it's important that our highly certified and highly skilled cross-categorical teachers have an opportunity to learn from each other and share strategies. So that bullet around really focusing on the staff talents and maximizing those talents. I hope that you see that as support for what you're saying around highly talented teachers.
The other question I have, if I may, Chair, is the notifications of our partners to make sure that our teachers are aware. For example, I got an email, and this will be on the next topic, but I got an email from MTI that they only learned last week that the employee handbook was on the table and even being discussed at a meeting. I'm just a little worried that I don't want us to forget anyone. That's my only thing. I'm good.
No, thank you, Nikki. And that is going to be this. I mean, this is for us to preview, but that's going to be discussed at our regular meeting. So we have a month to have a conversation about this. Let's do Gloria and Chris Caruzzi.
Yeah, thank you, Ananda. So my concern, I think, just answering these questions here. What excites you about reopening and recovery planning process? What else should we think about, and what questions do you have? I think what I would like to see is a targeted approach on how we're responding to supporting our Black students during this time, a very targeted, specific approach. I think it's needed. I think we were experiencing challenges before this, and I don't want to, and I know this is really exacerbating this as well. So I really want to see how this reentry plan, whether it be the face-to-face, virtual learning, and hybrid, in all these areas, I want a specific track on how we're going to support our Black students. And so, and I don't see that here. And I want to highlight, I mean, I know a lot of work has been done around racial equity in our approach to virtual learning, but I really want it highlighted in our approach here. And, it is highlighted in some areas, but as we move through here, I really want to see concrete steps on how we are approaching these three scenarios through a racial equity lens, and then also how we're approaching these three scenarios and supporting our Black students and where they're at, and the extra support they're going to need during this transition. And that's it, Ananda.
Yeah, no, thank you, Gloria. I know Lisa and I had talked about specific communications for the summer, we have credit recovery. We also have credit replacement. Is that what it's called, Lisa? Mm-hmm. For students that want to get their grades. So we're talking specifically about high school. I think now more than ever, we really needed to think about what is the targeted strategy as we continue to move this. So thank you for your question, Gloria. Lisa or Jane, do you have any comments on this?
I was just going to say, Gloria, I appreciate those comments. We have an opportunity to transform what happens in the fall. We do not want to go back to old ways of working that have created the gaps. I think we need to think differently about accountability. We want to lift both social emotional support and rigor for students. We want to keep those expectations high, but also wrap around and provide support in a more individualized way. So I appreciate your feedback. We will take that back. Thank you.
Ms. Caruzzi?
Thanks. Gloria, I really appreciate your comments around equity, and I have a lot of things to say, but I'll try to keep it as concise as I can. So first of all, what excites you about the reopening and recovery process? There's a few things. The first one is that I'm really excited about the notion of like using scaffolding to start kids at grade level as opposed to remediation. I think this is actually an opportunity for us to really walk the talk about holding all kids in MMSD to high expectations. Maybe it took a pandemic for us to finally like really hone in on what that means and how we put it into practice, whether it's virtual or in a classroom or in a hybrid model. But I think this is an opportunity for us to like really hone in on formative assessment as a tool that we're using possibly daily in our classrooms to understand where kids are at. I think while I appreciate the focus on grade level achievement, I think we need to think more broadly about scaffolding and also look at kids who are working above grade level to ensure that every kid in every classroom is getting challenged to do their very best work and assume that kids can do more than we've ever expected of them in the past. So I love that about what we're putting out there right now, and I really appreciate that you've done that. I think another thing that we can get excited about that builds off of this is using the same kind of thinking to approach behavior in the fall. I think none of us would say that the behavior education plan to date has been a rousing success. And I think part of that is because we haven't really thought about like if kids are having a hard time achieving our expectations for behavior, what supports do they need to get there? And the fact that we're in a pandemic right now, I think forces us to use trauma-informed approaches to behavior education with a focus on education so that we're really thinking about in the fall, how do we support kids who have been through trauma? And there will be a lot of kids who've been through trauma. What mental health support do they need? What student services support do they need to be able to cope with all the uncertainty of instruction that's going to be coming at them, whether it's online or in classrooms? So I think this is a chance to really focus on the education side of behavior education and do better. In terms of what else we should think about, going back to the draft project structure slide that you put up, I think that this is not a project. A project is defined as a short-term thing with a deliverable, and the beginning of the school year is not a deliverable, it's a milestone. The deliverable is really our progress on our goals in the strategic framework, which is highly focused on equity, which gets back to all the really great points that Gloria made about needing to look at this equity lens. I think we need to approach this as a program, not as a project. A program is a number of projects and other activities that all work together as a system to get you further along as an organization. And I would actually like to see that whole draft project structure reworked as a program structure with multiple projects inside it, such as the public health side of things is one project. The new approaches to academics and trying to use scaffolding and trying to figure out how we use, possibly a hybrid model of online and in-classroom learning as a project, trying to figure out transportation as a project. And there are so many moving pieces right now that not only get us to the milestone at the beginning of the school year, but also help us figure out how we're going to make progress on our strategic framework goals in a really uncertain environment. And I think that's really what the plan needs to be focused on, is those goals in the framework if we're going to make progress on equity. I think we need to be very intentional about making sure that this is not a top-down approach. We have staff who've got many weeks of experience now doing online learning, and some of them have probably made some really amazing discoveries about things that work well, about things that have engaged kids, about things that have gotten their students excited, about ways they've managed to engage families. And I think we need lots of opportunities for staff to be able to share what has worked well for them with everybody else on staff, so that the things that are good can be replicated and magnified. And so I would highly encourage us to not just use a top-down approach of like telling staff how to do online learning 2.0, but also use a bottom-up approach of what worked really well in online learning 1.0 and how do we magnify and replicate that. I also think that in the fall, if we're still in a situation where we're having to, like when kids are in classrooms, there's a lot of talk about like you can only have desks 6 feet apart and everybody has to be sitting in rows facing forward, wearing masks. Not an ideal situation for engaging kids, building relationships and doing like alternative kinds of learning. I think we need to look at outdoor learning as one approach that we use. I know a lot of countries and school districts are looking at that as a way to get away from the desks that are 6 feet apart. And even if, there may be struggles with younger children and keeping them socially distanced outdoors, but it's a way to get kids out of a room where germs might acquire on surfaces, and also like engage them in learning in different ways. I think one thing I didn't see in this plan anywhere was the arts. And I think when we're in an online learning situation, there's a really big chance of the arts being marginalized. And I think that's dangerous. I think for a lot of our kids, the arts are why they come to school. The arts are why they engage every day. Ollie probably has a lot more to say about this than I do. But we need to make sure that the arts stay at the center, that they stay funded, and that we are working with our arts teachers to find out what worked for them in virtual learning, so that whether we're virtual or hybrid, it continues to be a strong and important part of what our kids do every day. My questions, I want to echo what Julia said about attendance and grading and needing to continue to hold kids to high standards. I think as we move into the fall, we need to make school look like school as much as possible, which means that kids are supposed to show up every day and kids get letter grades. I think being, talking to teachers about what happened this spring, we had to do what we had to do because we had to get every kid online and we weren't there yet. And from an equity perspective, we just needed to function the way we're functioning. But in the fall, we need to be in a place where every child has access equitably, and therefore we can make sure that every child is held to the same standards for grading and attendance, so that we know that kids are engaging, because if kids aren't engaging, they're not learning. And I know that a lot of kids have just like thrown in the towel this semester because they know they've got their grades and they don't really have a reason to show up. So I don't want to see that happen again in the fall, because we're going to just lose more. Let's see. Just a quick question, and you don't have to answer this one, but can we see the project charter when it comes out? I'd be curious in having more of a discussion about how we're going to handle some of those big grade level transitions, the transition from 5th grade to 6th grade and the transition from 8th grade to 9th grade if we're online, because the change in culture and building relationships is really going to be difficult if with either online or a hybrid model. And I think we're going to need to pay special attention to that. I would like to hear a little bit more about what 8 to 12 standards-based grading looks like and how that's a change from what we're currently doing. And finally, I would like to know about our next steps in terms of engaging the board and staff and parents and students in planning for all the different scenarios we're possibly looking at next fall. That was a lot to throw at you, but I have lots of questions. I will be quiet now and let you talk.
So I can start a little bit, Chris. I've been taking notes, but forgive me if I don't have some of these answers. I think we will develop as we continue to work with you. First of all, I share your enthusiasm about the potential for above grade level opportunities for students. It is interesting, right? In a virtual environment, we could find ourselves having more fluidity around courses and content, some pre and post testing, some different kinds of groupings around interest or talent for students. So I look forward to trying that and seeing what will happen. In terms of the voice, we are doing surveys, as Andrew said. We're also putting out an interest application of sorts so that staff who would like to be involved in curriculum development and assessment development can do that. So we want teachers that have, proven success, as you've said, Chris, have found some really great things, will be working with us. Our teachers and leaders of our ANET schools are super excited about the formatives they have already been using, and we are building on those successes moving forward. I think that notion of the transitions is a really interesting one, right? From 5th to 6th and from 8th to 9th. And I will definitely take that feedback for the charter and do some thinking about that. We have a transitions cross-functional team. Love the idea of the arts. We will definitely get that in there and make sure that that is something that we're continuing to focus on. And we will certainly be able to share with you. We can't live in the pass-fail environment forever. Our students actually have to matriculate through classes. They have to move from Algebra 1 to Algebra 2 to geometry to calculus. There actually has to be, right, this engagement and incentive for learning that is above and beyond actually any grade. So just want to be sure that we're really deeply understanding that and helping students to also understand that as well, and using formative assessment along the way. And then I'll also just reiterate, you know, there's lots of different scenarios that we have been thinking about, you know, scenarios that could include, you know, 3 days on, 2 days off, you know, 3 days on 1 week, 2 weeks off in order to to kind of social distance for 2 weeks and quarantine and then come back. There's an AB day schedule. There are smaller groups of kids. They're starting with elementary first. There is just every day we get these, and I know that you all do as well, and you're hearing about this. We want to be sure that we take the time to think about what is best. And just the amount of information that's coming into all of us is at times feels overwhelming. So we will definitely share the project charter with you. I think we have a commitment to that, and we have a commitment to ongoing communication moving forward as well.
Thank you, Chris. Christina and Savian.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all of the work that is happening around this. I know this is not easy, you know, given the uncertainty of the scenarios that you're trying to develop. So I really appreciate the work that's going on. I guess one of the questions that I have, given the uncertainty and given that the regular start of school isn't going to look like it would any other September, I can't imagine that the planning that usually goes on during the summer is going to be helpful in its usual structure either. So I guess one of my questions for you is, do you have the staff that you need and the structure that you need during the summer in order to do the planning that has to continue? Again, I think I've said this before, but I'm concerned about all of our teaching staff leaving and then coming back right before the school year starts, and either them having enough time or us, you know, having enough of their expertise during the summer in order to do the work that we need to do. So I guess that's my first question.
Yeah, Chris, thanks. That's a great question. Actually, in my weekly meetings with MTI, we've been talking about exactly this. So we're getting the interest application out to all of our teachers. That's actually going to go out this week yet to try and solicit some folks to come in and help us work on this across grade levels. Also, highly qualified CC teachers can be helping us with this. We also know we have really talented bilingual resource teachers and dual language teachers in buildings that we need. We actually trust to do this work. We have teacher leaders in central office, just a few of them, whose contracts run a little bit longer and will be helping with this. But I think, you know, your point here was the traditional summer professional development is not quite a fit here anymore. So what we're doing with Jorge is we're actually inventorying all of our professional development. You know, people are booking and trying to get on the calendar already. But we're really reevaluating, is this the best use of our time? Is it the best use of our money? Where and when can this be happening, and who do we need to involve? So we're actually talking about that tomorrow in my teaching and learning meeting, and we're really focusing on what do we need to do now to get people ready for the fall. Also knowing that there is some just-in-time professional learning that has to happen. So we're also thinking differently about calendar and professional learning days. So Chris, I feel you. It is, we're thinking through that right now, and we can't do it alone. We have to have teachers involved with us from the field.
Right. Well, thank you for keeping us updated as you work through those protocols and figuring out what you need to. I guess my other question is that it seems like, you know, the obvious piece to figuring out how instruction is going to look and how students are going to continue to learn and the supports that they need next year, you know, to keep continuing to progress academically is really important. You know, the second like looming part of this is the public health piece that's going to drive all of our decisions as to what we can do going forward in the fall and what scenarios we do end up selecting. And so I guess one of my questions is, do we need some more guidance or explicit work with some public health experts to make sure that you know, all of the pressure for making those health decisions doesn't rely on our district nurse, but she has a larger team around her to support that decision process, and that it's pretty clear to the community that we are engaging with that level of expertise to help us make our decisions. I'm just wondering if there's a way to do that, or if that's for another discussion, or that operational side is going to give us, you know, we'll get an update on that soon.
Can I just jump in here? Chris, I think probably we need to communicate this better, and it will be part of our communication plan. But actually, I think Sally's meeting probably every day with public health. There's a public health representative who's assigned to schools, and some of us are in a meeting every day, more than one meeting with public health, both as we meet with DPI in public health, we meet with the 5 largest school districts in public health is there, with CISA in public health, but so we're getting a broad input from them. But most specifically, Sally is, I believe, getting what she needs between her connections with public health liaison already and the teams that she's working with, and our pediatrician who's assigned as an advisor to the district. But I think to your point, I think we can make that more explicit as to how we are working and getting guidance from public health.
Right.
So
I'm just thinking, I wouldn't expect any of us to be public health experts, anybody in the district. And so, you know, if we need a level of support of a you know, short-term advisory committee, specifically around people who have expertise in this area, I don't know how that would look, but just thinking about that.
I think we would have the resources to be able to pull that together if we needed it, but just in an ongoing planning way. I mean, if we come to a bump like that we need to pull some people together to say, what does testing look like? But I think Sally's work is already pretty much encompassing that. And Lisa, you probably know more than I do. And I know Jay's still here, so he probably knows even more.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Jay to jump in, and I know he's working closely with Sally. Just also know that Jane had alluded to earlier about sort of an expanded senior leadership team. Sally sits on our senior leadership team right now, and her voice is certainly appreciated as, you know, all of these health notices and updates happen on a daily basis. So she's a valued member of the senior team. Jay?
Yeah, Sally and her lead nurses are in daily communication with our nurses now district-wide. And I think Jane mentioned the significant collaboration that she has in talking daily with Public Health Madison and Dane County. Certainly as a district, we're also aware of the CDC guidelines and then those that have come from Wisconsin Department of Health Services in conjunction with DPI. And so we're making plans now for whatever those recommendations might hold when we get to August and September, to make sure that if there are supplies, resources, materials, that those are acquired now in advance. But you know, there are implications here for what it looks like when students and staff arrive in the morning, and what it looks like when they transition from space to space, and what common areas look like. Frequency of hand washing for students when we typically have never asked students to wash their hands. In addition, what happens when students and staff leave for our building services staff, and what does it look like now between school days in terms of cleaning and disinfecting? So lots of moving pieces here. I'm fully confident in Sally and her staff. I think Jane also mentioned that we have a pediatrician liaison, and we've also had a number of local health professionals reach out to us, hoping to be a part of that planning process. And so this will be central this summer to make sure that that we get the health and the health elements of the plan correct, and make sure that the logistics line up with all of those pieces.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jay. I think two things that are important as we're continuing to move in this journey of trying to understand education in the middle of pandemic. I mean, like, you know, formal instruction in the middle of pandemic is to really understand, like, what is our concern And I'll say two things. I participated in a community briefing last week, and I was able to find so many of the questions on our website. And I know I appreciate Jane like recognized that we needed to figure out how to do that more comprehensive as part of our charter, to say like, here's all the resources that we have put together about pretty much anything. And it's so easy to access. It's like, you just literally just Google it inside of our website, and there's like this, comprehensive resources. The other piece that is really important, and I appreciate, Christina, you framing that we are not healthcare providers and we're not public health experts. And public health experts are also not educators. And they're not also not teachers. They're not also administrators of buildings. So a lot of the recommendations that I experienced at the state level is the recommendations come in from public health officials, and then we have to translate that into what does it look like in a classroom and on a bus, in recess, in math, in science, in gym. It's a lot of the heavy lifting is coming from districts. DPI is providing some very general guidance, but it's impossible to give guidance to 450 different districts that have very different composition across the state. So the guidance that are coming from the Department of Education is very broad. So each district is having to do their own work around what does it look like in the everyday instruction format. So yes, so I hope that helps you. Is there any other question before we move to Savian?
No, I'll echo that, is that any response that we do have when we go back is going to have to involve all of our staff. So it's not just the school nurse anymore in charge of health, it's everybody in our buildings really, and figuring out how that, if we're doing testing and contact tracing and, all the cleaning protocols and everything. I mean, it involves everybody. And so the logistics of doing that, just want to make sure that our leadership team and our staff are being supported in, figuring that out in the time that we have to do that before school starts again in the fall.
Thank you, Christina. Savian?
So thank you so much, Lisa, and I really appreciate Jay and Lisa with the emphasis on social and emotional learning. Or social and emotional support. I am curious if there are ways that we can collect or like survey data on the mental health supports that we're able to do, because virtual appointments with a therapist are just different. So I'm curious about satisfaction, if we're seeing an increase in caseload. Are there common issues with respect to stress that students in poverty are maybe experiencing, because maybe a parent is a essential worker and they're taking care of siblings or whatever the case may be? I'm curious if we're seeing any new emerging trends in our mental health supports. I'm curious about sports planning. What is the thought process into that? And then answering some of the questions in specific, I guess one thing that excites me, or questions I have, are what opportunities we have to really encourage independent learning projects for students as they do learning from home. Let's see here, and like, how are we gauging content mastery with an equity lens as well, which I guess goes into the conversation over pass-fail grading and letter grading, is that, before, we do a switch, is like, how do we know for sure that letter grades are just not reflective of resources students have at home, and not reflective of different stressful environments that students may have at home that may affect engagement between students, because it is not an equal playing field at home. And not everyone responds to incentives the same way, or what we may think of as incentives. And then the last one is, how can we still engage the Black Excellence think tank and community partners in advancing Black excellence this year amid a hybrid scenario?
Sabian, I think your first question was just around sort of assessing social emotional intervention and supports, and the extent to which we know that those are working. And I think there's the formal, including some of our clinicians and partners that are actually delivering tier 2 and tier 3 mental health supports, and they're using follow-up, with the individual students that they're working with and also with their families, but recognizing that it's a new platform for them in most cases, using, telemed to deliver therapies instead of in person. Our support staff in every one of our schools are both delivering interventions and also assessing those through their regular communication with students, and that's a little bit more anecdotal. But through that process, in trying to make sure that we're making adjustments and figuring out exactly what's working best and doing more of it, and adjusting and moving on from things that we're hearing or seeing are less successful. We're eager to get the feedback from the surveys that Andrew mentioned earlier. I think more formal assessment where we're actually hearing from students, staff, and families with how we did and what we can improve upon with a couple months this summer to adjust those plans, I think is really helpful. But I think it's important to clarify that as we did when we kind of pivoted and shifted quickly into virtual learning, we're taking advantage of these last couple weeks of the school year and this summer to make sure that we're providing really clear guidance for all of our support staff, connecting with all of our community partners, and making sure that we're ready primarily with those universal supports that we want every teacher ready to deliver, but then standing right there behind them, the tier 2 and tier 3 emotional supports and mental health supports that we know that our students will need. I'll just a little bit out of my lane, but I can actually address your athletics question because I have 2 high schoolers, and I think, as I understand it, there will be a reassessment at the end of July with what the fall season will look like. But personally, as a parent, I've been really, really impressed with how this spring was handled with coaching via virtual platform, with daily activities, workouts, Zoom check-ins with teammates, Zoom check-ins with coaches. And believe it or not, my daughter in particular felt that there was a true team chemistry via the virtual platform, which I thought was pretty impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Savian and Ali. Final questions?
Thank you. I want to echo some of the points that Savian just made in terms of, looking at grading and attendance, although really valid and relevant for some students, have not proven to be sincere indicators of success for a lot of students for a very long time, going far beyond virtual learning. Lisa, I cannot tell you how much I appreciated the framework of this presentation from you and Andrew. It's really exciting to hear folks acknowledge that our current way of doing things created our current problems, and that this is an option to do things differently. And I think that that is only hard if our current way of doing things has resulted in your success, right? So the system we've always had has always worked for you, and you want us to get back to that as soon as possible. If it's never worked for you, which is so many of our kids and so many of our families, it's really exciting to think about doing something different. I also want to echo what Chris said. Thank you so much, Chris, for emphasizing the arts, and thank you so much, Lisa, for leaning into the opportunity that is including arts and virtual learning. I know you're doing a tremendous amount of work. I cannot imagine all of the work that you're doing, and we are tremendously grateful for it. The other framework I really want to emphasize is being excited about, and Chris touched on this as well, Chris Brucey, is the ability to talk about accelerated learning. And I think that this is an exciting thing for our students with disabilities, for our students who are incarcerated, for our students who do end up with a suspension, this idea that you get to stay in your classroom via remote communication, but also the idea that if you get behind, the narrative is not going to be you're behind. The narrative is going to be we can get you caught up. And that is so exciting. And that's an incredibly new approach. And you should be really proud of the work that you're doing and the way that you're thinking about it. It's an honor to get to hear what you all are coming up with. And I am profoundly grateful. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Ali.
Thank you so much, Ali. Let's move into the next topic of our meeting. And I am wondering if Janie, you're gonna set us up, and Deidre and Heidi are going to help us clarify a little bit more of what the framing of the next topic. And then I'm gonna probably do the same thing, but I'm hoping that we're just a little tighter, like share with staff what is your concern, and so we can do like a more efficient round. And then if you needed to pontificate a little bit more or provide additional references, that we can try to do that offline or via email or as a follow-up. Is that okay for folks? Just because it's coming to 7:10 here.
Okay, thank you, Ananda. I think I appreciate that process. So we're going to have a little bit of discussion about the handbook. I just want to let you know that these are preliminary recommendations, in that this is what we intend to bring forward with whatever tweaks and or changes might happen in our further meetings with MTI. While we've been having discussion with MTI leadership, we've also met with the senior leadership team, our Teachers of Color group, and our Principals Advisory group. And we've discussed these recommendations with MTI and given them our rationale for them, heard their concerns, and then this is what we'll be working from and planning to bring along with their input forward to you. So these are the drivers of this work. In addition to putting students at the center, we've had to consider budget. We need to be in a position to be as agile and nimble as possible as we can with our budget going forward. We've also taken into consideration the COVID-19 situations that we found ourselves in and the things that we've learned from being in this situation about how we need to be a little more nimble and able to respond in real time. The third thing, of course, is equity. And some of the things that we have intentionally been using the equity tool around these processes. And we have been talking with you about many of the changes here, and you have actually had recent conversations about how we could possibly move to make some of these changes. So we're trying to respond to that for you. So you have the memo in front of you, and Heidi and Deirdre here to answer questions that you might have. So I think we would just want to hear your questions and your discussions around the memo at this point. So Ananda, do you want to call?
So you don't want to, Deidre, to say a few things? Jane, I'm sorry, maybe I missed that. Was Deidre going to say a few things, or should we just start?
Deirdre, do you have anything to add, or do you want to just hear the questions?
Yeah, Ananda, thank you for calling.
Sorry, I thought that's what we agreed.
I think Jane framed it up pretty well, so I don't have a whole lot, and I know we're sensitive to time, so if we need to make the transition into the Q&A, again, we're looking to have discussion and dialogue around the proposed changes that we've brought forth. We understand that we still have about a month to meet and continue to work through coming to some consensus. I think our team is committed to doing that. I know Heidi's already been working on scheduling follow-up conversations. So this is an opportunity for you guys to ask questions if there's additional information that you need to understand to help make an informed decision. We'll try our best to answer as much as we can tonight. And if there's something that we can't answer tonight, we'll happily follow up with that in writing.
Thank you, Deidre. And I appreciate the layout, and want to share with my colleagues that after meeting with the team to prepare for this meeting, I asked folks to look at, the points, the recommendations from administrations to be centered around our goals for equity and equity practices, and for the policies that are have unintended consequences around inequities they get highlighted. And then if I understand that some of my colleagues may have additional questions in regards to data. So, if that is the case, we can also provide that. And I know Deidre and I had that conversation last week, and so maybe we don't have all the data today, but that to be collected for us to have a broader conversation for the end of the month. So with that, I wanted to open, Nicky, I see you. You coming second, Julia, and then Nicky.
I'm okay.
Nicky, go ahead.
Sorry, Julie, I didn't mean to step on you. That was my fault. I apologize. I was having Zoom issues and couldn't figure out how to turn it off.
You're good.
But very simply, on the handbook issue, here's what my fear is. My main issue is on the issue of hazard pay and using the equity tool when the majority of our people are behavioral security assistants and our security assistants are Black and brown. How is the district being the only one who can decide hazard pay the most equitable way of deciding it? I'm really, that's the one I struggle with the most, because those are hourly workers. They have the least amount of seniority often, and oftentimes they don't have as many rights and responsibilities, and that kind of worries me. My other issue and question on this is on the renewing the handbook every 2 years, so it doesn't have to have employee approval or board approval. I'm afraid with the way things are changing with this system and with COVID, I'm not sure that's possible. I think that things have changed so much, even in 4 to 5 months, and I'm not sure that can work for every 2 years. And those are my two main points.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nicky. I'm going to let Heidi tackle hazard pay, and then I will tackle the review cycle.
With hazard pay, currently, you as the board can make a determination if and when we want to give people hazard pay. So the only reason we're codifying it in the policy is because that way we have better access to COVID funds.
But it says only the district. Does that mean only administration, or does it mean district and the board? Because it doesn't say the board.
Well, the handbook is the board's handbook. And I guess my answer is the district works, the superintendent works with the board to make decisions. So that's what you hire administration to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Nicky, just as it relates to the handbook review process, I think one of the things that is important for you to know is that we're saying every 2 years as an at least, and trying to get out of the cycle of an annual cycle, partly because we've never actually ever been in a place where we've lived with our handbook without making constant and continuous changes. The at least language doesn't negate us from being able to bring forth issues at any point in time. Again, to Heidi's point, the handbook is the board's handbook. You guys, if there are issues that you want brought forth, you certainly have the autonomy and the power to provide input and feedback to us to bring forth language. We're trying to get a more manageable review process in place for administration and actually live with an existing handbook so that we can better understand where those changes need to happen. Heidi, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add there.
Right, and the language that is proposed does say as needed, but at the bare minimum every 2 years. So as needed means, like you're saying, Nicky, things come up, they need to be addressed now, and you have the authority to do that.
I thought of one more question, Ananda, may I?
Yeah, go ahead,
really
Nicky.
quick. There was a point on the calendar that it was already negotiated and then we're changing that. That was just kind of confusing. Could you explain that a little bit?
The language with the calendar is we work together as a committee to develop a calendar. And then the calendar was attached as basically informational within the handbook. Well, we learned through this COVID experience that sometimes things need to happen or things need to change. For example, we had to bring you together as the board to change that spring break. We weren't changing the length of break, but we were just changing the timing of it. So the reason we're asking to take the actual calendar out per se is so it doesn't have to get to that point where nothing is really changing fundamentally. It's not like you're taking away spring break or shortening it, but if you're changing where it sits or where a staff development day sits, that can be done more easily rather than bringing the whole board together to make that kind of decision.
Thank you very much, Heidi.
Heidi, thank you, Nikki, for your questions. Anika and Christina. Okay, Christina. Oh, good, Christina.
No, I have a couple of questions. Thanks for your patience in sort of bringing me up to the speed on this discussion as a new board member. One of the basic questions I have is that, does this run on a calendar year like a budget where we have to have this handbook approved by the end of June? Or for some reason, I thought it was delayed a little bit longer. And so I was sort of surprised to see it now.
We have an annual review cycle. There isn't anything that's codified that says it has to start at this point and it has to end at this point. And Heidi, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have sort of been all over the calendar. I think we've typically landed in a place where we've been able to make some final recommendations around November, December. I think our first year we were sort of in front of the board in the summer making recommendations. So I think it's changed over time. I don't think we've consistently had a place, but you're absolutely right. This is much later this year, and this is partially due to the COVID situation.
Yeah, generally we'd like to do it more, December, January, so that if there are changes that are agreed to, people know what they are prior to the upcoming school year. So if there was some, like, for example, if there was some change to some type of benefit, and that way a staff member could say, well, nope, I'd rather retire, or, that kind of thing. So we try to give it so that there's enough leeway so people can make employment decisions based on whatever changes are happening.
Okay, thank you. My other question is under the teacher surplus and layoff question around the 30-day notice. Can you explain to me how teacher contracts work right now and how big of a shift this would be and what it means? I see it as a budgetary matter and concern. Can you explain how all of those pieces sort of fit together?
So currently, when we look at layoff, we're generally almost always looking in the spring. So schools get their staffing plans and we see what the situation is. And at that point, we look to actually see if we have a layoff situation. If we have more staff in a given area, then we have positions available. So, and that's normally when it happens. And how we do it currently with teachers is through the non-renewal process. So if we have a layoff situation, then we non-renew that teacher's contract. And in general, I think that is the manner in which layoffs will naturally and almost always occur. However, again, with this COVID situation, I think it came to light that there may be instances where we need to have more flexibility around staffing. And if something had happened and we determined that we actually needed to lay off, not at the end of the year, but during the year, we wouldn't really have that availability with the current language with our teacher unit. We have it with all the other units, but not the teacher unit.
I'm just curious if our decision-making or uncertainty going into our budget and our staffing and the state budget, if that's driving this.
No, I think it's more our need. I think when we were looking at it, it came up because of COVID. And the need for flexibility in case you needed it. But is there a budgetary impact? Yeah, absolutely.
And again, I'm guessing, just to say this out loud, the uncertainty of what we're doing going forward due to the funding uncertainty is kind of where we're at.
And what instruction is even going to look like, I think, as well.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Savian and Chris Carusi.
One first initial question is for the changing the handbook process. How would either side initiate a conversation if there's a policy or a handbook item that they'd like to change? Or is there a form? What would be the formal process for that?
I mean, currently under the process, we come to you, the board, and say, these are the items that we're going to start discussing. And then if there's items that you want us to add, you let us know. And at the same time, the employee groups say, and here's the items that we want to discuss. And so that basically develops the list of items that the, what I call kind of subcommittees are going to look at as part of the whole review process.
Okay. All right, I think I got that. And then hiring for all support units. So the district retains the right to determine the job qualifications needed for any vacant positions. Minimum qualifications shall be established by the district. How are minimum qualifications currently established, or is it the same?
It is, the district determines the qualifications for positions. We have position descriptions that lay out what the qualifications we are looking for each of the individual jobs that we post.
Okay. That is it that I have for now.
Thank you, Savian. Chris Carusi.
Thanks, Ananda, and thank you for bringing this to us, Heidi and Deirdre. My first question, or my main questions, are really about process. I would like to hear some more about what the process has looked like to date to try to achieve consensus with MTI on these items. Like, how many times have you met with them? How much time did they have to review things? And what does the process look like moving forward so we can try to get to consensus? Because I think the goal is to have a strong collaborative process where we get to consensus with our employees and we're all happy.
So with regard to not all of these issues, but some of these issues, we had been meeting prior to COVID. And then we decided to stop because of everyone was trying to figure out online learning and everything. So there were a couple of these items that had been brought up previously, but as part of, I think things came to light more. Some of these things came to light because of COVID, some of these budgetary items, and some other issues we've had ongoing. And I think through our discussions and through certain things that you have brought to us, you know, when we had the layoff situation, concerns around equity, we brought them up again. So then we had scheduled a meeting and we reviewed these items. A couple of them we agreed to, the other ones we didn't. And the process going forward is to continue to meet with them throughout this month to try and reach consensus.
And if we don't successfully reach consensus by the end of the month, do we extend that timeline out, or are you just going to come to the board and hope that we can just pass something? I'm just kind of curious where we're trying to get to.
A conversation that we would have with Jane.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I have lots of questions about individual things in here, which I can probably email to you all. I think it would be really helpful to get a version of this memo that includes another column that states the current handbook language so that we can compare it to what's been proposed. It would just help me. It would probably eliminate a bunch of my questions.
Me too.
So just getting that would be enormously helpful. And finally, I just want to put out there that as a board, I do not think it is wise for us to use a public health crisis to push through changes in the employee handbook without achieving consensus. That's just not a good way to work. We need to ensure that we're keeping our employee voices at the forefront, and we don't want to weaken employee protections using the pandemic as a means to make permanent change. So I think we need to proceed very cautiously, and I think we need to do everything in our power to try to achieve consensus with MTI and other employee groups while keeping our goals around equity at the forefront.
Yes, thank you for that. I just want to just interject one thing. I think that certainly we appreciate that comment. I think that there is some language and some proposed changes here that, quite frankly, the district has been working on for some time. And based on where we are and challenges that we may have, will become an equity issue if we do not change them. So I appreciate the sentiment around not wanting to use this crisis, but when we look at layoff language the way it is proposed right now, as an example, it actually will impact staff of color and majority staff of color. So I think you've got these issues on both sides, and what we're hoping the board can do is for us to give you as much information as you need to make an informed decision, but also be thoughtful on the other side of it, and knowing that there are equity issues that would play out in either scenario.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Deirdre. Gloria and Ali.
Thank you, Ananda. So I'm going to sound like a broken record again. So I'm glad to see the equity strategy language in here. My question is, have you reviewed the entire handbook through a racial equity lens? And no, yeah. And then, so what's the process in doing so? I know I have brought this up last time we had this conversation about wanting to put a racial equity lens on this. And
so just, do you want me to answer that question?
Yeah,
or?
go ahead. Go ahead,
Okay.
and then I'll.
So the handbook is about 300 pages long. It is probably, and Heidi, you can do a better job of describing this than I can, but a compilation of our collective bargaining agreements, which is probably 7 or 8 of those agreements, with some minor changes that have happened over the 4 years that we've been in handbook world, 4+ years. In order for us to actually take a look at the handbook and propose changes specifically with an equity lens on 300 pages, when you're talking about doing that through a consensus and collaborative model, we probably would need a full year just to do that in and of itself. So I think that's part of the reason we're trying to sort of chip away at these pieces and parts. But we have not sat down and actually looked from front cover to back cover, and had a collaborative conversation across all of those addendums to get to proposed language with that equity lens. Heidi, I don't know if you have any thoughts about the timing as the sort of primary person that's leading that effort, like what that would take. You're muted.
I'm sorry. Given that I'm the only one in our department, to do the entire handbook at one time, I don't know how that would happen.
Okay, so I appreciate that. I know the extent of the work, but if we are going to commit ourselves to be an anti-racist school district, I think it is imperative that we do, whether it be in different segments. I think that, yes, I agree. Sitting down and doing 300 pages through a racial equity lens is not doable. But I would like to see what that process is going to look like. And I know we keep saying equity strategy, but for me, I would like to see a racial equity when we're talking about changing policies in the handbook, because this is where the rubber meets the road, right? I mean, this is stuff, and I'm glad to see when we're talking about hiring that we're changing, because that's a huge loophole, right? I mean, if we're gonna open positions only for internal staff, that is totally a barrier for our communities of color. So I'm glad to see that we're changing that, but I would like to see, I don't know, language means a lot to me, right? I mean, so when we talk about equity strategy, I really would like to see, you know, equity for me is like, you know, it's like it's a broad stroke, and I would really like to see the term racial in here, or some other term that really gets to our commitment to being an anti-racist school district, and that we will continue to look at every aspect, every part of our school district operations, everything with that lens, right? And so, and not only, and I know, Deidre, you do it, you have it, Heidi, you do, and you know, others within our district, right? You just naturally have that tendency to look that way. But I want our community and I want our board, future board, to be able to see that, that we're moving forward with intentionality around this.
Yeah, I thank you for that, Gloria. I appreciate that. I think one of the things that we will think about, but we'll also want you to think about, is really what does that process then look like? Because when we're tackling the entire book, which you're not the first board to tell us, like, one, get this down to less than 300 pages. It's ridiculous that it's that length. How do you create universality across this handbook, which is some of what we're trying to do, is trying to find that uniformity and where can we create consistency in the language, but then also thinking about the process, because as the process is set up right now, there are a lot of opportunities for subcommittees to meet and work, and then Heidi's meeting with the larger group. So in order to make that happen, I think we might have to look at the way that the process works. And, you know, quite frankly, it'll be a conversation that we have with Jane in terms of how we're prioritizing the work of HR and what needs to happen with that specific work going forward.
Yeah, and thank you, Deidre. And I think that with regards to MTI, I would like to see what that process looks like to work with them. Now, I recognize that when we are dealing with a small amount of population, and we're looking at this with intentionality around race, MTI may not, because they do support sort of a broader a membership, right? And they have to appeal for that membership. And so we may not agree around some of these focused changes around racial equity. And we're just gonna have to get past that. I think that we have to bring them along to help support this work. And so I agree, we have to engage them in the process to make sure they're aware. But I also want to have a conversation around how we bring MTI along around the racial equity work, so that they can be on board with this, right, as partners in this work. And so I know what it's like, right? I mean, to be part of a union and being a woman of color, and how that does, right? They're going to appeal to a broader membership, and not necessarily the needs of their memberships of color, right? And so, So I think, and speaking with MTI, I believe they are moving in that direction, and they are very purposeful about the racial equity work and in support of our anti-racist work. But I think when we are piecemealing this work, right, it leads to a broader a broader goal, right? And we have to bring people along with us in this process. And so, and we need MTI, right? We need them on board, and any other groups, right, to be our partners in this work.
Yeah, thank you, President Gloria. I agree on Elevate that. I do think that there's some systemic underpinnings both on a handbook and also on our policies that it's such a cumbersome type of work that end up getting pushed. And then when we notice that when we need the policies or we needed those foundational pieces and we realize it's like, oh, that, has built in a round of a lot of inequities or archaic or draconian language or not inclusive language. And we needed to figure out how to do that clean up in a systemic way. And I do agree that should not be a job of one person. So Nikki, I see your hand.
Yes,
Sure.
I have one quick thing. I happen to agree on certain issues with Gloria, but here's my only sticking point. Can we please put Black and brown individuals with disabilities into that racial equity lens, because they are often left out of that equity lens. And I'm afraid that they will be left out again. And I think that is a major issue in Mmsd that we do not handle very well, are people who are Black and brown with disabilities. In fact, they have some of the lowest scores and some of the lowest graduation rates and some of the highest discipline rates. So I'd like that included if possible in that system.
Good
Yeah,
point.
thank you, Nikki, for that.
Thank you. All right, Ali.
Nikki, I greatly appreciate your comment as I identify as a Black person who grew up with a disability. And so I think often we talk about members of the African-American community or the Black and Brown community as if we are talking about those communities instead of with those communities. And I'd like to let you know that members of those communities are right here, right now. I don't have a ton of questions around this. I really would appreciate the opportunity, Deirdre and Heidi, to follow up with you offline after I consult with our general counsel about where my conflict of interest comes into play. Overwhelmingly, I'm in support of a series of changes, specifically changes that encourage greater diversity in terms of hiring practices and greater ability to retain folks of color. So I think a lot of times we see a little bit of progress and our reaction is it's not enough. And I don't know if that actually gets us there any faster. So I want to say I appreciate the progress we're making, and that we've got to continue to push forward. And I agree with Gloria that we need to take a large scale equity lens. And I also agree with you, Heidi, that is a labor intensive effort. It should be, and that is a long-term conversation we need to be having. So thank you all so much for your work.
Thanks, Ellie. Deirdre, do you have any final words or thoughts? Oh, sorry. Chris, did you have something else? Sorry,
it's okay. I just had a couple of follow-up questions. I was wondering if the board will have another opportunity to talk about the handbook before we do any voting on the handbook. And I'm also wondering if there's any additional handbook items that are on the table that weren't in this memo. Like I know planning time has been an issue that's about, that has been unresolved for a long time. And I don't know if you're trying to get to resolution on that one.
I can just address, will there be some other items? Yes, there were some small items that we didn't include in there because they're really minor. And I think through further conversations, we'll probably reach consensus, so you'll see them there. With regard to planning time, we had some conversations. They didn't want to pursue it at this time. It's probably something we'll talk about further in depth during the summer.
And will the board be discussing this further before we vote?
I'm not sure how that process will
Yeah,
play.
we'll take a look at the calendar. At this point in time, we wanted to let you know that these are pretty much the things that we want to move forward, and then we'll just see what tweaks come about. And hopefully we won't necessarily need another discussion, but if we do, we will.
I would really appreciate it because I would like to sleep on it, but that's me in case I forget anything, because I like hearing all my colleagues and then thinking about it afterwards, but I don't want to hold up everyone else.
Nicky?
I think also if we're going to be making decisions about this pretty soon, one thing that popped out to me as a red flag was using educator effectiveness as a data point in surplus and layoff. I have concerns about the educator effectiveness process and the whole reason educator effectiveness came to be. I would actually like to get some more data as much as can be shared. I know that it's personnel data and it would have to be very, very high level, but you know, how many of our staff or what percentage of our staff are we putting on improvement plans? How does the process work? Who's making these decisions? And you know, what percentage of an educator effectiveness determination is based on test scores versus classroom observations? Before voting on this, I would just like to understand educator effectiveness better and be able to incorporate that into my decision making.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's an addendum. Yeah, and I'd love to talk to you more offline, Chris, because it's the work of one of my colleagues too. And I think there's some misconception about that work, and it'd be good to get some previews of what that looks like from Madison. I'm looking, I'm not seeing anybody else with their hands up. And Deidre, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, just appreciation for this group and the feedback that you all were able to provide. Very helpful and thoughtful and thought-provoking. I think one of our takeaways that we heard was that having an updated memo that lays out the regular language right next to the proposed language would be really helpful for board members. So we'll absolutely do that. And Chris, we can work offline to get you some data and that we'll share with the entire board. But if you have very specifics about what you want to see and what you're interested in as it relates to EE, educator effectiveness, we're happy to provide that information as well, and entertain any questions that the board has between now and the end of this month. So thank you.
Savian?
Thank you so much, Deidre and Heidi. I really appreciate that. I guess one comment about adding the extra column on current handbook language is some type of analysis is if, you know, the position of either side is they are in agreement with the status quo or agree that it should be changed. There's just not agreement on what it should be changed to, but an agreement that the status quo is not working, if that makes sense.
Does that make sense, Heidi?
I think so. So what you're asking is it we agree that it should change, we're just hung up on the language, or there's just a disagreement about wanting to change it?
Yeah.
Is that kind of sum it up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Deidre, and thank you, Heidi. There is one really important recognition. Today is June 1st, Pride Month, and it was really beautiful to attend a ceremony where our colleague Ali Mudro raised the flag by herself. It was the progress flag, and I want to just have her just talk a little bit about that. And then if you missed that, it's on our Facebook page, the video of that historical moment. So Ali, you want to tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, and happy Pride. We are celebrating the LGBTQ+ community and inclusion and what it means to be welcoming across our district. And you all are part of a group of people that made history in making that happen. And so I am proud to serve with you and proud to have gotten to raise the flag today. And hopefully our young people in our community know that all are welcome in our schools. Everybody has the right to connect. So
thank you for highlighting that work. Huge shout out to Dr. Herding and Dr. Belmore, and Liz Lusk, Bonnie Augusta, Cherie Haas, who have been so supportive in this work and made today possible.
So in front of our Doyle building, we now have the progress flag, which is the rainbow flag, with a modification of the black and brown stripes to signify the expansive intersection of our communities. It was a really beautiful historical moment for members of our community, but all our students and our families as well. Jean, any final words before we adjourn the meeting?
Oh, thank you for ending us on that beautiful note.
You're very welcome. Can someone make a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Nicky, second by
Savian.
Savian. Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
Your last one? Your last one? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 7-0, meeting adjourned. Be you all, everyone. Be safe and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Ananda. Bye.